Welcome to the Restricted Handling Daily Intel Brief. This is what's been going on in China in the past 24 hours. Today, the biggest China story is the way Beijing's strategic competition is expanding across multiple fronts at the same time. The headline is still the recent submarine-launched missile test in the Pacific, but the more important development is what came afterward: the regional reaction, the diplomatic consequences, and how countries across the Indo-Pacific are adjusting their own security strategies in response. An update on the missile launch. The focus is increasingly moving away from the technical details of the test and toward the political impact. China's Ministry of National Defense said the PLA Navy's strategic nuclear submarine launch achieved its expected goals and described it as a routine annual training activity. Beijing also emphasized that it had notified relevant countries in advance and portrayed the event as consistent with international practice. But the reaction from neighbors shows the gap between China's explanation and how the region interpreted the move. For Australia and several Pacific Island countries, the concern is less about one missile launch and more about what it represents. A China that is increasingly comfortable demonstrating military reach in areas where regional governments do not want great power competition to dominate. That is why Australia's diplomatic push across the Pacific has taken on new urgency. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has spent recent days strengthening security relationships with Fiji, Vanuatu, and the Solomon Islands, trying to build a regional network that keeps Pacific countries closely connected with Australia and away from exclusive Chinese security influence. The new agreements are part of a broader Australian strategy that combines traditional security cooperation with development assistance, policing support, and economic engagement. Canberra's argument is that Pacific nations should have partners who strengthen their ability to make independent decisions, rather than becoming dependent on any single outside power. The Solomon Islands remains one of the most important examples of this competition. After signing a security agreement with Beijing in 2022, the country became a focal point for concerns that China could eventually gain a permanent security presence in the region. But Prime Minister Matthew Wales' recent criticism of the missile test shows that Pacific governments are not simply choosing sides. Many are trying to maintain relationships with multiple major powers while making clear they do not want their region used as a strategic playground. The missile test also highlights where China's military modernization is heading. Beijing has spent years expanding its nuclear arsenal, and the sea-based portion of that force has been one of its biggest challenges. A submarine-based nuclear capability matters because it provides survivability. The entire point of these systems is that an opponent cannot easily eliminate the ability to respond after an attack. China's submarine force is still behind the United States and Russia in experience and capability, particularly in stealth, but Beijing is clearly investing heavily to close that gap. The likely involvement of a Type 094 submarine and a JL-3 missile shows the direction of travel. China wants a more credible nuclear deterrent that can complicate U.S. strategic planning, particularly during any future crisis involving Taiwan. And Taiwan remains one of the clearest places where China is applying pressure without crossing into open conflict. Taiwan officials are increasingly focused on what they describe as a slow change in the regional environment. The concern is not necessarily one dramatic military move. It is the accumulation of smaller actions that gradually establish a new reality. That includes increased Chinese Coast Guard activity, government vessel operations, and military movements around Taiwan. Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense reported 9 PLA aircraft, 9 planned ships, and 3 official vessels operating around Taiwan during the latest reporting period, with several aircraft crossing the median line of the Taiwan Strait and entering Taiwan's air defense identification zones. The significance is not the numbers themselves. The significance is the pattern. Beijing continues testing where the limits are, creating a constant requirement for Taiwan to monitor, respond, and spend resources managing pressure. A similar dynamic is playing out between China and Japan. Chinese and Japanese authorities offered competing accounts of another confrontation near the disputed Senkaku Islands, known in China as the Diaoyu Islands. China said its Coast Guard expelled a Japanese fishing vessel that entered waters Beijing claims. Japan said Chinese Coast Guard vessels approached a Japanese fishing boat and were forced to leave. These encounters have become increasingly common. They are designed to reinforce sovereignty claims while remaining below the threshold of military escalation. The Philippines is also taking a harder line. Defense Secretary Gilberto Teodoro said Manila's priority is stopping what he described as China's gradual expansion into disputed waters. The Philippines is building closer defense relationships with the United States, Japan, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, while increasing military spending and investing in capabilities such as drones. Teodoro's comments reflect a broader regional trend. Countries are recognizing that economic dependence on China can create strategic vulnerabilities. The challenge for many governments is balancing trade relationships with China while ensuring they have enough security partnerships to resist pressure. That same competition is now playing out in technology. Chinese artificial intelligence company DeepSeek is reportedly developing its own AI inference chip, a move that could reduce its dependence on NVIDIA and Huawei processors. This is a major strategic development because the AI race is no longer just about who develops the best models. It is about who controls the hardware, manufacturing capacity, and supply chains that allow those models to operate at scale. DeepSeek's move reflects a broader Chinese effort to reduce vulnerability created by U.S. export restrictions. Washington's controls on advanced AI chips have forced Chinese companies to accelerate domestic alternatives, and Beijing is increasingly pushing technology firms to build more self-sufficient ecosystems. The technology competition is also affecting telecommunications. The Federal Communications Commission recently designated California-based digital system technology as a national security risk and denied approval for international telecom services, citing concerns about links to Chinese telecom companies and the possibility of vulnerabilities involving U.S. communications networks. The case reflects a broader U.S. effort to limit exposure to Chinese technology companies viewed as potential security risks. At the same time, Europe continues trying to manage a more complicated balance between security concerns and economic relationships with Beijing. The Netherlands is working through a dispute involving semiconductor company Nexperia, which is owned by China's Wingtech technology, while maintaining restrictions on advanced chip-making equipment from companies such as ASML. Thank you for listening and for contributing to the growth of this community. If you found the show valuable, a review or a thoughtful comment helps extend its reach to others. For more in-depth analysis, we publish a daily intel brief on Substack, restrictedhandling.substack.com, covering Russia, China, Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK. Take care and have a great day.